Hey everybody, it's JJ here. You're watching Bull, Boom, Bear, Bust. Really thank you for joining me today for this broadcast. And we have an important update today on the housing market and what many are acknowledging is the housing bubble. And we've witnessed the home ownership rate dropping here recently. That means more investors are buying homes and less people living in the home as their primary home are buying here recently. Before we get into the other news, let's take a look at this chart. And we showed this a few episodes ago, but I just wanted to start off here because this is going to be explained in more detail here. So we saw at the beginning of the shutdowns in 2020, the Great Sickness was rolling out, and we saw the big surge in home ownership, this big spike to the right, unprecedented, and the bigger surge even before the housing bubble as far as the rapidness and the steepness of the rise in home ownership. A lot of people left the cities because of the remote work situation, looking to buy a home in lower priced areas and more rural areas. But then it dropped, and it dropped big time. So what happened? Well, institutional investors are back. These are hedge funds. These are actually even foreign investors. So to those of you renting, you could be writing out your rent check to a foreign investment company, a foreign hedge fund, and we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. But first, we want to revisit this topic that we've been discussing here a little bit more recently, because the topic of the overturning of the eviction moratorium has been in the news more lately, because first the moratorium got overturned by a judge, and then it got disputed, and it basically got paused because of an appeal. But rents are soaring for millions of Americans. We know that. We've been looking at the charts here, how rents have been rising. And what's been happening? Well, property owners, landlords, have been raising the rents on the people that are paying to try to compensate for all the people that are not paying, right? So the people that are getting rent for free, the people that are not allowed to be evicted, are actually hurting the people that have to pay, because the landlord is just going to charge those other people more to try to recoup or make up for the difference. Now, the small mom and pop landlord that just owns a couple properties, they're not going to be able to do that, because if one tenant's not paying, they're going to have a hard time doubling the rent on the other tenant that is paying. So if you have one or two or three properties, it's not going to be as easy. But if you have hundreds or thousands of properties, it's going to be more easy to do that, because the percentage of people that are not paying will just pass that along to the other 100 or 1,000. And it doesn't have to be a doubling of the rent, but it can be pretty significant to try to make up those other losses, maybe a 10%, 20% increase, who knows. But this is what's happening, and we're seeing more institutional investors come in, buying up homes because the small mom and pop investor landlord are having to sell. And more people that wanted to cash out and get some equity are also selling. So people are now choosing to sell in many cases and going and renting somewhere. Now, that's still not going to put enough supply on the market, because you still have the other moratorium, which is the foreclosure moratorium, keeping basically millions of homes off of the market. But let's go ahead and talk about this recent article. This is out of the Wall Street Journal. That suburban homebuyer could be a foreign government. Overseas investors turn to America's single-family rentals. So not only is it institutional investors, corporations, and hedge funds and such scooping up homes to rent out to people, they're actually, in many cases, foreign owned. And the first part of this article starts like this: big foreign investment firms that buy office buildings, hotels, and shopping centers around the world have a new favorite real estate play: single-family homes in American suburbs. And this includes overseas investors who are following in the footsteps of many big U.S. investment firms and pension funds, which started buying single-family homes on a large scale in the aftermath of the financial crisis. So they're doing the same thing. Now, they stepped back. It was actually dropping. Foreign investment in U.S. properties was dropping in 2018 and in 2019 and early in 2020. But as it became more and more clear that the money printers were going to keep the market propped up, big foreign investors came in and started being more heavy-handed in buying these properties. And now, according to this article, they account for nearly 1/3 of institutional investment in single-family homes in the United States. 1/3, that's a big chunk. Right now, why is this dangerous? Well, one, potential home buyers are going to have to compete with institutions, and institutions have deep pockets. So you're going to see more prices surging. It's going to be more difficult for first-time homebuyers to get their foot in the door because they're competing with big money institutions, hedge funds, and so forth. But two, these big institutions that own hundreds and thousands of homes, again, they're going to be raising the rents on the people that are paying the rent to make up for any people that are not paying the rent, which the small mom and pop landlord cannot do as easily as a big institution that owns thousands of homes, right? So it's dangerous in many ways. You're going to see rents really skyrocket, home prices continue to skyrocket because the investors buying up so many homes now. Now, more mainstream news outlets recently, I've noticed, have begun acknowledging that there's a housing bubble. Now, here in this channel, we do often look at mainstream news articles from corporate media, but most of the time we disagree with their analysis. So oftentimes we'll punch holes in the headlines and say this is not true, that's not true. But actually, Axios has been very impressive lately. They've been really stepping up their housing coverage. And this article here is called The New Housing Bubble. It just came out yesterday, May 5th. Right now, I'm not sure if it's Axios or just this one writer. His name is Dion Rabun, it looks like. But here's what he says in this article, The New Housing Bubble. And this is really close to the analysis that we've been putting out here for the housing bubble. It says, quote, unlike the environment ahead of the 2008 crash, housing prices are not being driven higher by a raft of underqualified borrowers getting mortgages they can't afford from unscrupulous banks. Well, I think there is a big fraction of that, but it isn't as bad as prior to 2008. But then he continues, they're being driven by government and central bank intervention, radically increase the money supply, mortgage forbearance, stimulus checks, low taxes, and low interest rates, right? It's a combination of a lot of things, and he hit the bigger ones right here in this article, right? So hats off to Axios for acknowledging that this is money supply, forbearance, stimulus check, and central bank and government-driven housing bubble. Now, how crazy is this current housing bubble? Well, here's by the numbers. CoreLogic latest report finds that home prices increased over 11% in March compared to March 2020, and that's a huge year-over-year increase, and that's the most in 15 years, according to CoreLogic's data. And just from February to March here in 2021, home prices went up another 2%, according to this data. And the big daddy of the bunch with the biggest price increase was Boise, Idaho, and that led all metropolitan areas with a year-over-year increase of almost 28%. All right, so the people that own a home in Boise are probably not liking their property tax bills, but these inflated values are good, I guess, if you're selling. But the problem is, if you sell your home and take that equity and take that gain, where are you going to go put your money next? Are you going to go rent an overpriced apartment somewhere? Because rents are also skyrocketing. Are you going to buy a house in another city that's overpriced? Or are you going to move to a lower price state like maybe Indiana, Ohio, Iowa, and some of those Rust Belt states over there? All right, so where does it end, folks? In my opinion, the only thing that's going to stop this is some sort of monkey wrench gets thrown into the money printing machine. The plug gets pulled on the money printer. A black swan or some sort of massive outside force comes in and takes down the entire system. Maybe a blackout, maybe a massive grid failure. We'll have to see. But even during those times, they can still prevent foreclosures and manipulate things to not allow prices to correct. So pretty scary times here, especially if you're already living paycheck to paycheck and you're having a harder time getting into a home. It's going to be harder and harder unless something big jumps out of the darkness and changes up this entire direction right now that things are being headed. And it's only headed higher and higher and higher, according to what we're going to see. The people out of the Fed that are talking, they're saying they're only going to support the markets more, and they still have the whatever it takes attitude. However much money is needed to support, quote unquote, the economy, which means keeping the bubbles inflated and blowing them bigger. That's their definition of the economy. All right, more stimulus checks, so more people go out and spend, and that'll make the economy look better. They can point to the GDP number, and they can say, hey, look, incomes are rising because of all the checks we sent out. Isn't this great? So there we go. That's the housing market update for today. Foreign homeowners, what do you guys think about this? Institutions coming in, buying homes, renting them out. They're going to be the ones raising the rents the most because they're going to be the most capable because they have the most tenant pool to put the higher rents towards. Could get pretty ugly here, folks. I'm thinking a lot of people are going to have to go to RV living or van life. And maybe even myself, if it gets much crazier, you might be seeing me camping out someplace like this in a motorhome. I hope everybody's doing well at this time. Stay well, stay safe, stay prepared. Until next time, stay well. Peace.